Great, thank you. So welcome to, before we get started with Kim's presentation, I just want to welcome everyone to the second session, the Carbon Finance Brown Bag of the August Learning Series, where we've been exploring themes on transparency and quality, and how we can increase the trust in the marketplace between buyers and sellers. If you joined us, if you missed the last one, we had been joined by Saif Bhatti from Venoster, which is a platform to score carbon. They have a rating system that they've developed to help shed light on good projects. And we have that recording available for you if you'd like to catch that one. So before we get started, let me pass to Tim, our co-lead for the Carbon Finance Collab, to introduce our speaker today, Kim Rath. Tim?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Yeah, my pleasure to introduce Kim. I've known Kim for probably about 5 years ago. 5 years now, right, Kim?
Yeah.
And Jack as well. We were proud to invest in her first company, Topple. And then now she sits on our IC and advisory board. So always really happy to have her in our orbit. And since she segued over to the carbon project development space, it's been just for me a great learning partner to hear how, with her very structured, diligent technology mindset kind of approaches, what are the different, how do we build the tech stack from a project developer perspective across digital financial services, different types of MRB, whatever it is. Like, it's always fascinating to hear how Kim is approaching everything that's out there and what you build versus buy and how that's evolving over time. So I think she'll have a lot of really fascinating insights. And yeah, she's always been a pleasure to work with. So really excited to invite her here today. Take it away, Kim.
Thanks, Tim. So yeah, I will jump right in. So I'll do a little bit of a what is imperative first, and what do we do? Where do we start? Why do we start? And why another project developer, as people will say in the space. And so I'll dive deeper into that, and then I'll kind of unlock this the bottom orange piece here of how are we optimizing these projects using technology. And so ultimately, Imperative's mission is to design, develop, own, and operate at scale the best carbon projects in the world. And what I'll do is I'll unpack a little bit by what we're saying: design, develop, own, operate at scale. To start off, I kind of want to tell the story. One of our founders is on the call. Mark is one of the 3 founders of Imperative. But Scobie, our CEO, he started up the carbon practice at Macquarie, and he realized that while he was looking at the carbon project development space, especially in emerging markets, and that is also where our primary focus is, and I'll dive a little bit deeper as to why our focus is in emerging markets. But he really looked at this space, and there were 3 things that kind of stood out during the time that he wanted to look at investments. One of it is really saying, when we talk about scale, we're saying we need to think about the supply of high quality offsets that we have to get out of these projects. And then when we say high quality, the question became a very important one of how do we make sure that, that you have the necessary information about that offset, or the actual legitimacy of that offset as you are developing those projects. So once those offsets are available, how do you know how legitimate those offsets are? And then at the same time is how do you make these projects as bankable as possible, especially us being focused on emerging markets. As most of you will know, a lot of these projects start from like NGO ground up. A lot of it's grant funded, a lot of it's not large scale. So it's really thinking about like, how do we build a project development organization that's equipped to cater to high quality scaled projects that are highly bankable and investors would want to put, a lot of money into for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, because these projects are very long projects. So what we did is we said, okay, Scobie, Mark, Jake, they went out and said, we have to find the right combination of individuals to really help build this high quality carbon offset project developer. And so what we really focus in on here is what I say here on the right, is the boots on the ground project development. So one of the biggest things we had seen is that there is this massive need of carbon project developers, not just being, a financier of that project, but actually getting involved, boots on the ground. So that's one of the biggest things that I feel is very differentiated from what we do as a project developer. And with that actually comes a few pieces. So, and I'll actually talk in the tech about these pillars, but like we go from project identification to project execution operations to MRV, to benefit sharing, and then to market integration. So there's this full suite of actual need for individuals or expertise across those different pillars. But one of the things we also saw in the project development space was the need to not necessarily outsource your technical carbon assessment, but bring that in-house. So that was one of the pieces. And then the other piece is really bringing across industry some operational excellence in executing large projects. And Mark, who's also on the call, actually comes from, I think at a time, he ran the largest project that was being developed in the world scale-wise. And so he comes from, different industry and brings that expertise and operational expertise to actually executing inside of our projects. So we kind of go from bringing in deep technical carbon expertise to bringing in, Jake and Scobie both have legal training. So emerging market legal structuring, really thinking about like structuring the deals in a way that investors would want to invest into a 30, 40-year deal. All the way through to really saying, how do we bring technology to optimize this full process, right? Like, how do we really build, if we're going to be boots on the ground, if we're going to, leverage some of these major project approaches, how do we actually take on a lot of those operations? So to take it full circle here, so when we say we design in our mission, we really say we have in-house technical carbon expertise that is able to really help design those projects. We have in-house finance structuring expertise that can help develop the actual product of that project. And then we have in-house project ownership operations to own and operate, to really help with the actual execution on the ground. So we have integrated teams with the project partner on the ground, and we work with them. We're actually on the ground with them very often to execute the project itself. And then this fourth pillar is kind of where I come in primarily, and it's how do we now go across this whole project life cycle, and we add this layer of technology to help with the transparency of what we're doing in these projects. So before I go to like how we're unlocking the tech side of what we're doing, I wanted to first just go why we're focused on emerging markets. There's kind of 5 different reasons that stand out that we kind of emphasize. One of it is we believe that we can make the greatest impact, positive impact in these regions. Additionality, and I don't know if everyone's familiar here with the project development speak, but additionality is one of the key criteria for carbon projects, which ultimately means that you would not have to the project wouldn't happen without the finance, wouldn't have previously happened without financing. So we believe that this is the additionality is pretty clear in these regions. There's a lot of need for these economic and technical expertise that need to be inputted. Like I said, a lot of the operators in these regions, as you guys probably know more than me, it's nonprofit, grant funded. So getting things off the ground and not having access to bigger chunks of cash or actual technical carbon expertise is very difficult for those projects to even see the future of the execution that they want to try and see and help those communities. Ultimately, economics, most avoidance or sequestration outcomes per dollar. So obviously, if you're investing, the cost per dollar in those regions are very different than doing it here in the US, for instance. And then biodiversity, right? There's a lot of outsized biodiversity co-benefit opportunities that exist in these markets. I'll unpack a little bit the SDG side of this in the next few slides, but these are the main reasons we really said we believe this is where we will be developing carbon projects, and honestly have no interest in the other. There are a lot of project developers in the other regions in the world. So for us, it's emerging market and least developed country focused. Now, on the tech side, so when Scobie asked me to join the team last year, obviously my biggest question is, why do you need a tech arm too, right? Like, you have this operational excellence with Mark, you have our technical carbon expertise. Like, why do you also want to bring this in-house? And the more we discuss, the more I realize there's this divide in the industry. So what we're seeing is we see project developers without tech development skills, like actual technology expertise. And we see technology providers a lot. And I actually spent the first 6 months when I joined talking to about 200 different companies in the space that are servicing project developers. And the biggest challenge is they need those customers, those users, to give feedback on their products or use them. And so it's technology providers without project development expertise. So incubating an actual tech solution within a project developer was something that became very appealing, and actually the way I think we should be doing this, just for the reason for the next few slides, is our tech approach is to say, okay, number one priority for me right now is, how do I enable Imperative's mission, right? Like, how do I make sure that the company can actually design, develop, own, and operate at scale the best carbon projects? But the challenge I saw in the industry as I looked across a lot of these different products was, there is this lack of an integrated platform for driving visibility across the whole life cycle. So there are a lot of products in specific pieces of the life cycle, but it's really saying, how do we bring visibility across? And then also, how do we create a single source of truth, like a single point of access to that high quality validated supply side data? So I'm not necessarily saying remote sensing information, I'm saying ground truth information from that project developer on, like, and I'll go through a few layers of what that looks like. So how do we create a place where we can bring all that data from different pieces of the project lifecycle into one single point? And so what I decided to do is say, okay, for us as a company, obviously we don't want to build new tech. So I went and said, build, buy, what does that look like, as Tim mentioned? And I actually used Tim as a sounding board a lot. And I said, how do we go and drive visibility and create that single source of truth? What does that even look like? And maybe because we're creating this necessary architecture in the background for that data to all be housed, there's this opportunity to unlock a way to exchange that data with external parties as we go. So what that meant is, okay, we take these 5 pillars, as I've mentioned them before. We go from all the way from the start of the project, from identification all the way to market integration. And we started looking at, like, what does a tech platform look like? Now, this slide is the very techie slide, where it's like, there are 2 layers to this. The first layer is the bottom layer. It's literally the layer of, how do you collect the information, store that information, and then analyze that information from these projects? And the second layer is, how do you share that information and visualize that information externally? But this is the slide that actually unpacks a lot of these pieces more for us as, you know, general I am a tech person, but it is better to see it this way than to see it on a tech stack. So if I walk from the bottom up here, so what I started seeing is a lot of different really cool software, hardware, I mean, platforms also across certain pieces of the actual value chain that had all these different data types, right? So if I start with, like, project identification tech, so if we look at these white blocks as our layer 1, right? So you will, when you're in the identification process of the project, you're seeing GIS data. So this is like vector raster data. You're seeing some interesting AI opportunities. You're seeing some survey data. This can be manual, this could be digital. As you go to project execution, you're seeing, you know, sensitive data like cost data, HR data, project management data. You're starting to see remote drone all the way to satellite data when it comes to MRV. So you start seeing, you know, more information that's further away from the ground. And then with the benefit sharing transparency tech, which is what I want to unlock a little bit and discuss with you guys some more, is you're starting to see how do we share, how do we actually get those payments to these individuals on the ground that are part of the communities that we are sharing revenues and benefits with from this project? How do we transparently show that? Is there a way to record that is, through payment data instead of just, actual surveying? As all of you guys know, a lot of that can be lost in translation. So it's really like, how do we connect to the source of really helping these individuals get direct digital payment, or get contracts set up in a digital form so that it can be connected to the payment, so that we can transparently see that the community was paid the actual share of the revenue that needs to be paid. And so all of these questions obviously came up, and as these white blocks, you can imagine what I started seeing is like, in every one of these white blocks, you can imagine there's like 4 to 10 different tools, or even more, that exist in this space, that could service these different white blocks. And so what I started saying is, what we need to do, number one, is this layer one. We need to, for every project, we look at projects, everything from ARR to Red Plus, to Blue Carbon to Cookstove. So we actually are pretty much see a lot of NBS, and the non-NBS stuff we do is very much focused on looking at the integration of some NBS aspects. So you might have a Cookstove project that has a little bit of an ARR piece to it. So what we do is we go every project, we say, okay, this is a Cookstove project. Here's the project management tools that are necessary to serve these white boxes. And here's the list of carbon and impact management tools to serve these white boxes. So we kind of differentiate between those two. So we create what we call a project tech stack out of these tools that are external. So then my job becomes layer 2. Now you have, for every project, you have, maybe 10, 15, 20 tools that you're using within that project that we package as, a bundle. We help that project actually implement, support them to implement those systems. And then what we do to really aggregate that information is this next layer, is how do we bring all that information into a single source of truth? How do we extract information from all these different tools into a single source of truth? So that's kind of step 2. Step 3 is then layer 3 here, which is how do we unlock further? Now that we've brought all that information from all these different systems into one location, how do we then create just simple project execution operations dashboards, all the way to creating actual APIs and access for insurers, rating agencies, marketing platforms, verifiers? Like, how do we go further on really unlocking that data access all the way to the individuals that are analyzing us, criticizing us, looking at what we're doing on the ground? And so these are kind of the 3 layers that we're working with. We started at layer 1. We're now tapping into layer 2, and we'll unlock layer 3 in the coming year. And now to give you a visual of what all that means, right? So if we think about those white boxes, think about these left-hand pieces, right? So you have continuous remote sensing, that's data, very, very far away from the ground. You then have some ground truth data collection that's happening. So it might be an LiDAR, or even very like a soil sample that's being, an actual device used on the ground to collect some of the soil. Then you have maybe physical verification. So in South Africa, there's this interesting company called Agrigistics, and they have this way for, instead of, the workers to tap in and tap out as the traditional ways, they actually have these little tags that allow them to actually show exactly how much work they're doing, and not be subject to someone else saying how much work they're doing. So there's these physical verification opportunities, and then there's obviously this aggregated monitoring. But what I want to show you guys here is the bigger piece of it, right? So this is where what we started saying at Imperative is, how do we create a unique ID for every single data source that we're collecting from every one of these different tools? So what you see on the right side here is, for instance, the salary of an accountant in a field nursery for this for the project partner on the ground. So this data point, the salary being $50,000 per annum just this week. So this week, you know, that person is still at that rate. This data is uniquely saved as Project 001 RSA to South Africa ARR Field Nursery 1, our strategic operators partner, and Field Nursery. So this unique data point has a unique ID in our system. As well as, you know, the next one is also an example. You have work hours for subcontractor, planting property 2. So you know exactly how many hours that subcontractor worked that week. So again, unique ID, 001 South Africa, ARR, planting property 2, subcontractor, and they're in the planting team. So a lot of this, the reason I show this, because it's about what we're seeing we're going to be able to unlock. So not only does this create an opportunity for us to visually create dashboards for operational excellence, so from a human capital perspective, to be able to look at staff versus labor, what does that look like, where are we, etc. It allows us to also analyze. And what we want to create is this imperative norm that allows us to benchmark not only across projects, but across regions. So imagine really benchmarking from budget to budget the salaries of, you know, different projects, and actually headcount, even just the types of individuals that you hired in one project versus the types of individuals that you hired in the next project, and the salary differential, and making sure that we can actually analyze that all the way to the work hours. Like, how long did it take someone in South Africa to plant a specific species versus in a different region? Now, this all comes down to what we want to call an imperative ton, right? So ultimately, we have to bring our carbon offsets to the market. And so every single one of our imperative tons will have a unique ID that is associated with a unique project, and would allow you to actually trace back that information. Now, what does that mean even further from a transparency perspective? This unlocks for me, and this is where I, coming from the impact side, get very excited, because one of my biggest challenges before, you know, in the industry, as even from a blockchain perspective, was we need the necessary data to really see, to really make the claims we want to make, right? So if we want to claim, you know, SDG 8, we need to be able to showcase the exact data that underlies SDG 8. If we want to claim, you know, gender equality, we need to be able to showcase that actual data and transparently show that. So, and the example here I just propagated. So if we think about the headcount of 30, all of them were locally employed, and we can show that, and they're earning above average salaries. So that then augments and translates to us being able to really talk about that co-benefit 8 in a better way than just, oh, we're, you know, as a project developer, we're doing some decent work in economic growth in these regions. We need to be able to show these claims. And same with gender equality. In this specific region, a lot of females are being employed. It's showcasing that that's happening, right? Like that these individuals are actually working the hours that are being claimed, and that they're being paid the right amount. So for me, that is the biggest piece of this, is how do we unlock the next level down? Now, once we have collected this data, once we're physically verifying, now we need to go to the next step, and that's kind of the discussion I want to have once I'm done here. But I just wanted to close this off with, ultimately, the idea is that you would be able to not only search an imperative database for that unique project and be able to visualize that whole project for yourself, you'd be able to take that information and tag it to the Verra issued certification. So when you go into Verra, you might actually be able to go back to the project and see all the information on that project. There's a few other what I call channel partners that I've also discussed with, essentially, that want to ingest this information. utilize it not only for maybe some of their modeling, but also really think about how do we showcase this visually to their buyers, to their market, so that they can show that transparency of what's going on the ground. So the one thing I am kind of wanting to come to you guys, right? When we think about this benefit sharing transparency tech pillar, I want to ask the question of what are we not thinking about, right? And so when I say that, the next slide is kind of is my definition of what this benefit sharing pillar looks like, right? So we believe that one of our biggest opportunities, being boots on the ground, is our ability to be radically transparent regarding the revenues and the benefits we're sharing with these communities. So our objectives are really to visually and show all the tangible outcomes of the projects, and in a big way, I really want to go as far as tracking the payments, that we can tell the story that we're verifying the flow of funds as they go back to these individuals. So ensuring community benefits, creating value by the veracity of these impact claims, but also differentiating ourselves through this radical transparency, because it is really our focus. We're not just trying to make a bunch of claims. We want to be scrutinized too, right? It's not just, it goes both ways. We want to be able to show transparently what we're doing, how we're doing it. But now the question becomes the technologies that are necessary to collect that information. So obviously you guys will see here on the right side, I list a bunch of technologies that, you know, I've talked to, discussed with, interacted with. So a lot of what we really want to try and do is say, what are we not thinking about? Where should we be focused? Who should we think about? Is there any specific payment providers that we should put our attention on? Everything from, like I said, it could be anything from InsurTech to AgTech to any ancillary stuff. So for instance, in a cook stove project, you have the opportunity. So what we're doing, just to give you guys a quick example, in the cook stove projects, you have a cook stove that you're placing within these households. So we are now working with a strategic tech partner to embed an IoT device inside of the ceramic cook stove that we actually develop on the ground. So we track the distribution, etc., of these cook stoves, but that IoT device tracks, you know, the temperature usage and actual usage. But then there's the question of air quality. There's the question of health pieces that come with this. Like, what are the other things we're not thinking about that we could unlock using technology, because we've created this environment where we can track information from the ground and not just do a remote sensing exercise of collecting information from my computer, right? It's really saying, how do we unlock further what can happen on the ground and how we can be transparent? So I wanted to stop there. I know that's already a lot. So but the question to you guys is, what are we not thinking about? And I could probably stop with also saying, we are still very young. We started a company like last June, so we're not even we're a little bit over a year old. We've done one pilot project in Malawi, and we're currently working on a South African ARR project. We have a bunch of projects in the pipeline. There are 3 more that will probably be active in the next 6 months. So there's a lot of this unlocking that I now need to do. And a lot of these next few projects have very deep community pieces to it. So I will be focused on really figuring out exactly how do we make sure that the benefits we're going to claim can be showcased.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. I hope you take a breath. That was terrific. And well, if you would like to ask a question to Kim directly, by all means, feel free to unmute and to ask. I'm encouraging you to participate in the discussion. And in the meantime, Tim was asking about, I don't know if you saw in the chat, he was asking about how the data fidelity or quality demands for credit buyers, how will you think about it now versus in 5 years, and what do you need to do to prepare for that?
Yeah, so I mean, this is even an internal discussion that we've been having. The immediate question to us is, what is necessary in the short term and what can we do in the short term? So one of the things on being incubated in a project developer, I'm trying to use every project as a use case. So we're not trying to, front run too much. So when I say future case, I definitely think, Tim, that we have to, that unique ID that I talked about, like, has to exist for every single data point. And we need to be able to unlock and actually search for those unique IDs, every single one of them. In the short term, though, I think for us, it's because we're using this data real time in our project execution process. We're going to be testing the actual validity and the quality of the data by internal dashboards, etc. So I think there's a little bit of a shorter term solution of, hey, these are the critical data elements that need to be as high fidelity as possible. And then there are other data elements that we might store or archive that later need to be, checked. But I think that there's kind of the two pieces of this too, right? For me personally, I think that there's already a need for high quality data in this space. And so in 5 years, I think we're more planning for, for us, in 5 years, we're probably only going to see like some of the first issuance on some of these projects, right? So I'm already planning for that to be available now so that it can be used in the 5-year window that is coming up. So I kind of have to think 5 years ahead right now, in my opinion, because of how long these projects take to issue some of their credits. So yeah, it's a tricky question because there's what we collect now, and then we're already trying to anticipate for what the market's going to want in 5 years, because that's when our credits actually issue.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kim. You don't have to answer it now, but it's one thing when I talk to project developers, I think is interesting because, there's the vintages of credits nobody buys anymore for certain reasons, right? Around the science that's progressed or the data that's available. And so it's a really hard industry because you do your best at this time, but when you're developing projects, it's a long timeline. So it's interesting to see how you're grappling with that. There's not too many industries where I think you have that like dynamic changing in the underlying commodity or product, right?
Yeah, and it's also, I think then the other part of this too is like, I mean, I need that time is also necessary for meaningful data, right? So the sooner we collect that information, the better it is for later as well. So there's those pieces of this that so it's kind of like the challenge now that then helps solve a future opportunity, but it's balancing it out of how much information do I collect now, how much information is meaningful, etc., etc. So there's a lot of internal questions in the tech team itself of like, I think even Melanie's next question here is like, where do you store the data? What are the costs related to scale that data storage? It's exactly those types of questions that are coming up of, if we're ingesting all of this information, okay, cloud storage, sure, it's becoming cheaper and cheaper. There's a lot of data fidelity and more governance questions that come in because this information comes from different regions of the world. So that's also an avenue we've taken pretty seriously, is really saying like how and where and how sensitive, and being a statistician myself, like I have a lot of people that kind of sit in like a mini data committee, really thinking about like, what are the things we're not thinking about on the data side? And so, yeah, so Melon, to answer your question right now, since we are still in the early stages, I've been able to kind of run like a POC, like a proof of concept for some of these projects where we have like simple data storage, and looking at the actual lift or size of those different data pockets, if you want to call them that, and from there we will really look at different avenues. So there's some interesting stuff you can do on the data side, like archiving some data so it's actually smaller in size, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of actually blockchain world type of interesting data storage solutions that exist, that you could store a lot of information if you archive it correctly, tie it correctly to the actual history of where it's coming from, etc. So there's a very big data architect exercise going on underneath all of this, that's exciting but also necessary.
Thank you.
Melanie, did that answer your question? I don't know. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah,
Yes.
it really, this is just totally fascinating. And yes, you have. The reason I was asking as well is because one of the things I've come to understand, so I'm in Zambia, in Lusaka. We've collected a lot of data on smallholder farmers through the platform that we've been using for tech and providing market prices and all. But one of the things I've started to really understand is that government, so for example, in Zambia, they've actually introduced a policy and a regulatory requirement that data be stored and kept in Zambia. And it becomes very interesting then, not just in our space or what we're doing and what you're looking to do, but even in health and education.
Mm-hmm.
So data is being stored and the ownership of that. And if you like, there's an element, I think sometimes it starts to go into a space where it's considered, some of it is considered as a public good, where there's a national interest or an interest where you would want to governments, ministries would want to have access to certain data in line with their national strategies. And then I think it becomes just really interesting, how you work with that and how you who does, who pays, how do you sustain, how can you share data that's really relevant to accelerating, sort of projects and programs that are needed in this space. I'll stop.
And I'm so glad you bring up the ownership thing, because that's the other part of this that's very interesting. Is so I have a really, one of our, I would say, our data science advisor. She's from Burkina Faso originally. She actually did her stats PhD with me at Rice here in Houston. And she actually brought this up too, because as Burkina Faso is also trying to get, a very forward thinking about data being, collected through different types of different types of projects that are going on in the country. So she was on a CDC project specifically, and how you actually share that data with the governments, or the necessary data that they want. And also that's the other part of this, is that exchange between what you're trying to achieve with the data versus what the governments need. And also remember, from us perspective, I'm trying any sensitive data from a governance and regulation perspective. We're trying to make sure that the data is held to, the privacy regulations within those regions, right? So there's a lot of unlocking that needs to be done when it comes to the specific region that you operate in. So what we did, for instance, with South Africa, there's specific governance rules for South Africa's from a data perspective. But then, so we wrote the data policy to be very focused, to cover kind of Europe, US, the bigger jurisdictions. And then for South Africa specifically, we focused in on the South African policy. So I think there's going to be an interesting unlocking for every region we operate in. And then, yes, Melanie, I think there's going to be a little bit of a, local storage, cloud storage conversation that happens. And even if it's just clones, but it's really thinking about what that looks like. We've even decided that for our projects, we will probably provide that support of having, especially for the lifetime of the project, which is 30, 40 years, right, is to have local storage of that data, so that we will manage. Right, that it's not something that we burden a project with.
If I may, I don't want to hog the conversation, but I just wanted to add one other thing. I think what's be interesting to look at as well is if there's regional initiatives you know, when you're looking at cross-border, so you've got, you know, the SADC, the African Union's right up there. But I think looking regionally to see if there's initiatives going on as well that might really be helpful in terms of, rather than having to then be country by country, that you're then looking at a sort of regional agreements. There's so much going on in that space as well around free trade and agreements and so forth. It might be that there's something there, maybe not now, but certainly within the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, and I think thanks, Melanie, for mentioning, and I think Jane just mentioned ICMI, which we are also part of, and I think I should probably a little bit unlock the data aspect of that, or have those conversations. Yeah.
What did you mean that you're a part of that, Kim?
Yeah. Yes. So this is the I think it is correct. I mean, I could check with anyone else that's on here. But that the Malawi project that was actually showcased as one of the first ones for the ICMI. Yeah.
Tim asked a question, but I'm going to interject because I have a question as well that you could take a look at his question afterwards. Is who is the end user that you envision? Maybe you have more, several, but you know, would just a consumer like me access the platform, or is it thought more for a B2B type seasoned or expert carbon professional?
So from a grand vision, the data should, you know, I don't necessarily think we need to get into the UI UX of all the way to consumer. I think we need to create the necessary APIs for a consumer platform to easily access that data and tell the story in their platform. So you should probably be able to access the data through a consumer platform that is essentially just streaming that information into their environment. But you never say never. You never know what this evolves into. I don't see that as primary priority. I see it more B2B. And so my as an architect person, as an infrastructure person, I would like to build the best plumbing so that it's easy for those platforms to just, you know, have access to this infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Tim, did you want to ask your question?
No, people have probably more important questions, but I'm always curious because the landscape's changing, but you can take something else more, CTO related or something else.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Some question would have to be a Jackie answer, so it would not be or Mark answer. So I would defer to them for the one that he put in the chat regarding tax and regulatory landscape, because this is what Jackie deals with very often. You're muted, Jackie.
Yeah, I can go ahead and just answer real quick. I mean, I think that's definitely something like Imperative as a whole has been deep diving into and assessing, and we've those were some aspects of how we kind of have come up with sort of our tier 1, tier 2 country list in terms of like risks and just you know, our ability to be able to expand in certain geographies. So it's less, that consideration's kind of already done from like just the project developer standpoint, as opposed to on you know, Kim's side, if you will, like on the tech side. So it's less of a tech consideration, I would say, and more of a project developer consideration.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? One question I had for you, Kim, was, have you had the chance to get the inputs or reactions from established standard organizations? If so, what has been their reactions?
Not necessarily standard organizations. I have a few friends at some of the ratings and more market side of this. I think a lot of the reaction has been there's a need for the data. The clearer it can be for that data to make it to them, the easier it could be for them to, think about their digital processes. So there's obviously, a whole ongoing exercise with the standards groups on regarding like how do they actually make it easier to do some of this issuance. So a lot of the messaging has just been, if we could really get supply side data, not have, like if we can essentially make the audit process easier for how they're looking at projects, the better it would be for what we need to achieve, or the speed in which we're achieving a lot of this verification, if you want to put it that way. But yeah, mostly just general, not high up responses. Just, kind of testing the market on what that layer 3 could look like, essentially. Primary focus for me is layer 2 of how do I serve Mark, our chief projects and operating officer, to run projects in a very efficient way and be able to look at that data and make decisions on our projects, and then unlocking that external view once we've kind of iterated on what it looks like. Well, let's put it this way. Once the data is very valuable to us, then I will go a little bit further and explore a little bit more R&D wise what this looks like for external parties, and if we unlock this tech externally versus keep it in-house. That's kind of the evolution of my thinking.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other questions for Kim and team? I was when you were showing the audit, well, just the data, and I think it relates to the question around data storage. One thing I found that was really compelling was how you were characterizing the data at the, how much observation, how much ground truthing is there available to access and to see. And we did do a brown bag with CAVEX as well, and something I found really compelling, even from an end user point of view, was that you could go into any project, any installation at a given time and see the monitoring almost in real time, right? Like you could see the video of it being done. I'm not sure if those are kind of video feeds or channels you're thinking about, but intuitively.
No, exactly. This is actually on the next slide. CAVEX.
Awesome.
So yes.
Content.
Yes. No, but it was just like to showcase a little bit like what are potential partners for those feeds, but CAVEX is one of them. Yes, like I big fan of both Copa and CAVEX, same founder, right? Like, but yeah, it's really, I've looked at like the Copa is not necessarily like carbon project development focused, but I've kind of had the conversation on like how to use CAVEX. How could we use Contani Play even, right? Like something as simple as feature phone data feeds. But yes, very Jane, 100% like aligned. Like there is data there that I don't have to go build a platform to ingest this information, but it's about the actual backend connection to those platforms, and then ingesting that and then being able to showcase some of those pieces alongside some of the other project execution pieces that then give you a lot more insight about the activity that's going on.
Because I do think that, I mean, obviously the rigor and thinking through, smart and efficient use of the architectures in place, but that's why I was asking the question about who's the user here. And how do you help them? How do you help make it intuitive, but also resonate from the standpoint of saying that this is quality, and I perceive the quality. So I remember thinking that about CAVEX, right? The fact that you could see how it was being done and put something that's very much in data terms, make it very tangible. For me, it resonated quite a bit, right? Like not just as a person trying to understand carbon finance and markets, but as a user. So that's why I mentioned it in terms of what that balance of your short-term data needs and priorities, and having that overlay on your future design or preparations for what you need to build 5 years from now. So that was a reflection.
No, and my short-term user is Mark, who's on this call. Our Chief Projects and Operating Officer that needs to not have to look at 50 different tools at the same time, but can actually look at a series of 5 or 6 dashboards that has all of that information aggregated, and he can make decisions on those projects almost instantaneously. So that's like priority number 1 for us as a team. But yes, then once I get user feedback from him and other of our project partners on how that makes it more efficient for them, we'll start unlocking a little bit further from there. That's kind of like how, and it's a little bit of a bottom-up approach, which a lot of what's going on the market is a very top-down approach. And that's why I think it's so different coming in, incubating inside a project developers, first serving that in-house user, getting feedback constantly from a feedback loop. So it's first Mark, but then it unlocks like Arno, our Chief Carbon Officer, you know, how do I help him do better PDD analysis, do better, you know, growth modeling analysis, like those data feeds. What does that look like? And so it's really unlocking a lot of the users inside us as a project developer. And so Jane, honestly, externally, this would probably be a tool that we would then leverage for carbon project developers first, other carbon project developers that want to essentially unlock some of this within their projects that don't have access to these types of technologies or aggregation of technologies. And then from there is, once we have this data architecture, then you start unlocking those standard data models that open up the world that's more exciting, which is the user, us as users, seeing all of that information ourselves.
Got it. Well, I want to just take a few minutes to thank Kim for joining us on this session. And you know, you were asking for feedback from us. I think if any of the attendees and the broader network are able to share that, I'm happy to reach out and help make those connections happen. But also to you know, ask for you guys, of anyone in our network that you might look to for future feedback or getting inputs, right, as you're thinking through the different users along that journey that you had just mentioned. So perhaps we could share that with our networks for any feedback that you're looking for in the future. And I just want to thank you and your colleagues, Jackie and Mark, for joining and making the space and time to allow us to learn more about Imperative and the approach, and really understanding what this integration, how challenging, but also how remarkable it is to design the tech for the project development and create that linkage. So that's been really insightful. And so just want to thank you for being part of that, and welcome our members to reach out if there's anything you want to ask further or have feedback on, and vice versa to you, Kim, and your team. And just to the larger audience, we'll be scheduling upcoming brown bags in September and for the rest of the year. So if there are any other companies, experts, or perspectives in the ecosystem that we want to cover under this topic, and if you also even want to suggest upcoming topics, then let us know as part of the learning series. And finally, if anyone is at Africa Climate Summit or Week next week, some of the CFAR members will be there. So feel free to reach out to try to connect and meet in person around speaking events and networking, social receptions, things like that. Anyway, back. Yes.
Yeah, no, so Scobie, our CEO, will be at the Africa Climate Summit next week.
That's terrific.
So, yes.
Great. Well, terrific. We'll keep an eye out for him. And Nelly, did you appear wanting to add something? Oh, okay, great.
Yes, thank you.
All right, terrific. Well, Kim and Jackie and Mark, thank you so much. And wonderful to meet you all and have you here today. Thanks to the members for attending as well. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for having us. And please, yes, feedback would be great. Any feedback is awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.